Welcome to Special Topics, where faculty, students, and staff discuss daily news and how it relates to their teaching, research, and studies. So welcome everybody to session number 4, Special Topics. Today we're going to be speaking guests, 2 faculty members and 2 students at Black Hills State University. And our topic matter is going to be taking a look at interpretive studies in an era of interpretation. So go figure that. So what I'd like to do is have our guests introduce themselves by stating their name and their title at BHSU and tell us some of the things that you do at Black Hills State University. So we could start right over there.
I'm David Cremean, and I'm a professor of English here at Black Hills State, and I also teach a lot of humanities classes as well.
My name is Abby Riley. I'm currently a student at Black Hills State University. I am an environmental biology major and an outdoor education minor.
My name is Lisa Axmit. I'm a student at Black Hills State University, and my major is outdoor education.
And my name is Chris McCart, and I am an assistant professor of outdoor education, and I teach an eclectic group of classes that consist of both adventure ed classes, so yes, I teach people how to fish, but also the outdoor education and interpretive studies classes, so I teach those as well.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Yay! I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk today. We're going to talk, and what I usually tell everybody is that we just follow the conversation as it goes. I mean, I have a few guiding questions that we go by, and then we just kind of talk and see where we can go from there. So just relax, everybody, and just sit back and relax. Okay, so let's go back to the faculty members, if we could, for just a minute. And if we could ask Dr. Cremean what his PhD is in exactly, and from where did he get that, and maybe at the same time just talk a little bit about some of your scholarly work and your research interests over the years. That would be very, very interesting to hear.
Oh boy, I could go on. I will try to cut it fairly short.
No, you can take your time.
I actually initially graduated with a bachelor's degree in physical education, which I had told everybody earlier, and I was very interested even at the time. This was back in 1980 when I graduated with that degree. I was very interested in outdoor education, or what became outdoor education anyway, but there was almost nothing offered nationally in that field, and I think I knew one guy that was going into it, maybe my junior or senior year, that was leaving our school to go somewhere else where they had it. And I had really developed that interest. So that was part of my interest in being with this group. In terms of my own actual scholarship, I have done some eco-critical writing, or at least what was called that by somebody. Once I was called a rising young eco-critic, and I was already in my mid-40s, so I never did understand that label. But in a review, I read that somewhere, something that I'd written. I think it was on an article on Hemingway and fly fishing.
Well, that's rising. You're rising toward your middle age at that point, right? So that's supposedly the peak?
Or falling into it, I'm not sure.
Okay.
So my degree in my PhD was actually from Bowling Green State University in northern Ohio up near Toledo, and we did not have the Bowling Green incident that famous recently.
Hey, go figure.
Yeah, but that's what I did that, and I took some outdoor type writing courses and reading, with a lot of readings, and my main interest has always been the American West, and so I've always had a strong interest in that sort of outdoor activity and writers, and from all sorts of different perspectives. And I've taught the environmental lit course here a few times now, English 492, which is a topics course we trade off years, and I think I've taught that 4 times now. I'll stop.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. Yeah. That sounds really interesting. Dr. McCart, how about you? Where'd you snag your PhD at, and what are some of your past and current research interests?
No, I graduated just a couple of years ago. I worked on my PhD mid-career. I got it at the University of New Hampshire in their Experiential outdoor education program. So, but I also have a master's degree in biology with an emphasis in environmental education.
Fun.
But the field itself deserves a little bit of definition in that it's very interdisciplinary. So outdoor education can range everywhere from, outdoor physical activities to also environmental education. So it can include both the environmental and the physical way of being in the outdoors. My particular area of interest is how people, well, I have two that I've been working on. My dissertation work was looking at how people develop their outdoor ethics and relating that to moral development theory. And so
wow, we could have a conversation on that just based on some recent activities, couldn't we?
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, my main finding was that immature people litter.
Okay.
But there was some other really neat things with that, I think, anyway. But
Immature people litter. Okay.
Yeah,
What an interesting finding.
But there is actually different ways you can work with folks based on their level of moral development. Yeah. So, and then my other area of interest is actually less research and more evaluation. How do programs that are teaching to certain outcomes, how effective are they and how can we measure that? There's a lot of outdoor education that goes on out there that's wonderful but may not be super effective. And so I help people set up those measures to see if they are actually making a difference.
Wow, that's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. Okay, let's go on to our students. Abby, would you like to talk a little bit about how you've decided to follow your environmental biology major with a minor in outdoor ed and here at Black Hills State University and some of the things that you've been doing?
Certainly. Originally, I started at Western Dakota Tech in 2004 for certified in pharmacy technician. So I worked at an inpatient for years and found that it really wasn't the cat's meow. Doctors and nurses, as far as medically, are not my cup of tea.
Oh, is that right? How interesting. Now, that's a whole other conversation in itself, too.
Definitely. So I continued my education at the University Center in Rapid as far as doing all my generals. Also working, I have 17 years experience as a customer service, restaurant mostly. That is also not my cup of tea. I learned a lot of interpretive examples as far as that goes as well, how to talk to people and be kind and nice and
compassionate,
very
possibly.
Compassionate. You have to have a smile no matter what you do in that field. But anyway, I'm in my senior year here at BH. I've started in cellular biology working with Dr. Dave Bergman. In the beginning of my undergrad, we did some salmon egg experimentation as far as finding what bacteria could survive antibiotic incubations. Wasn't very successful at first, but I know that he's continuing to do further experimentation with salmon eggs through McNinney Hatchery. So that was quite enjoyable. Working in a lab did take its toll a little bit. I was home quite late. Often I have a child at home, divorced, so I kind of had to back off that field a little. But I am more towards the environmental side, taken dendrology, plant systematics, a lot of botany courses, so that's
cool.
I'm a nature lover.
Yeah.
So originally my minor was chemistry, and I figured out that I hate chemistry.
Well, you really dabbled in a lot of stuff that you found out about, right?
Right. Well,
but that's great.
You
That's
gotta
wonderful.
find out
what
what your
adventure.
niche is.
What an adventure.
Yeah, so
That's awesome.
I had found out about Chris McCart's program for outdoor ed, and I just really appreciated it and decided that's what I wanted to minor in.
Well,
so
that's
that's where I'm
excellent.
at now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, so we'll go on to Lisa Axmit, and we want to talk to Lisa a little bit about how she decided to become an outdoor education major at Black Hills State University. So,
Well, thank you and welcome. Well, I'm originally from Sheridan, Wyoming, and when I graduated in 1984, I got my AA degree in elementary education, and then I switched, because my aunt was a hygienist, so I started looking at her books. So I switched into dental and became a certified dental assistant for 10 years, and then also a certified aerobics instructor for 10 years too. Then I got married and divorced, moved to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and became a certified nursing assistant. But at the same time, I was always doing the outdoor activities. I hunted, I fished, water skied, downhill skied, did all the outdoor EDSI stuff, and I was always in the mountains. And so then I decided, after being a dental assistant and a certified nursing assistant, and being a certified nursing assistant, I dealt with a lot of the elderly, and a lot of them were passing away. So I thought, you know what? I applied for the Forest Service, and I couldn't get on at the Forest Service because I didn't have that piece of paper. So I decided, well, at 48 years old, I'm going to go back to school again. Well, the program in Sheridan, Wyoming at Sheridan College decided to close up. So that year that I was going back, so they said, why don't you try Black Hills State University? I said, well, those aren't mountains, but they're hills. It's outdoorsy. There's forests. There's places to go, canoeing and fishing. And so I transferred over here and got into the program here. So that's my long story to be at Black Hills State University. I'm really proud to be here, and I'm also a senior.
Awesome. All right. Yay.
We're almost done.
Yeah, it's a long haul, isn't it? And it was a long haul to get there. In the beginning, it sounds like a lot of exploration and adventure. So I'm sure you have quite a bit of experience in all of that time span with the issues of interpretation, which is something that we're going to get into now to define a little bit. I think I'm not going to tell everybody exactly what interpretive studies does or what interpretation is. I think I'd like to hear from each of you what your definitions are. And then specifically, maybe you can explain, along with your definition, how you connect your current work or how you got involved with interpretive studies. Okay, so David, would you like to take a stab at that? See where it goes?
I'll take a stab anyway.
All right.
Certainly interpretation is at the heart of literary studies, for instance, and even for that matter, writing itself. You have to observe and interpret your experience to write something down, whether it's a paper for an English 101 course and a more specific assignment maybe, or whether it's in the creative realm. And for me, I'm aware that interpretive studies in some ways is much more, at least as a title, is in some ways much more connected with positivism and social sciences than it is with fields like ours and so forth. And yet, certainly we all use interpretation heavily, probably no circle longer and more than within naturalistic studies and within English. Or within language, I should say, in literature, really, not just English. And for me, I have found that because of my love of studies within English itself, and people like Thoreau and Edward Abbey and Doug Peacock and Charles Bowden and other authors that I particularly like and in some cases got to know, that there's this passion for interpreting the world that comes out of it, and vice versa. Passion for interpreting the world ends up cutting back into it, I think. And I always liked science, and I always have loved the outdoors since I was a kid and spent time in the woods and lived a year in Arizona in the desert in first grade and stuff like that. And I never really got into interpreting too much of what I did or knowing as much about it, frankly, until probably the last 15 years or so. Moved here in 2000, so it's been 17 years. But probably about our second year here then is when I started doing that. And really became more interested in knowing what things are called, what they are, why they're called that, and really much closer observing of what's right around me if I'm out hiking or fly fishing or biking or what have you. And oftentimes I found now I like to go to the same place over and over to really get to know it. And I think we can only do that through interpretation. So it's like a literary text. You often return to it over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And yet even there again, a lot of the literary texts I love so much, like A River Runs Through It or Cormac McCarthy's writing, and that is doing much the same thing, or those earlier authors and many more that I mentioned.
All right, thank you. How about you, Abby? Do you want to take on that?
As far as interpretation goes, I've learned a lot more than I ever knew anything about taking Chris's classes. As far as my definition of interpretation, I would have to say your target audience is the most important first aspect of any interpretation. It discusses your message, your theme, even your passion for what you're talking about and what you're informing others to learn, to embrace,
Lisa, how about you? Would you like to comment on that, please?
Well, when I first started into the interpretation class, I'm in McCart's class too, I wasn't quite sure what interpretation was until we got into it, that it's reading Sam Hamm's book on interpretation, that it's called TOR, and it's thematic. You have a theme, it's organized, it's relevant, and enjoyable. And I've been wanting to... And then
So TOR is the acronym. T-O-R-E.
Yeah, is the
Okay,
acronym.
and who does that?
Sam Hamm.
Sam Hamm.
An interpretation book that Chris McCart uses in her class. So.
All right.
And then I started looking at it, and I'd never, since being in the medical field and fitness, I didn't really focus directly on environmental issues. So it got me to open up my mind and be more broad about, when I'm out hiking and backpacking, I'm thinking more about the environmental issues, and to look at it more in the perspective of how we all should be looking at all the issues, because I was more focused in the health field and medical than in, I was still environmentally aware, being outdoors.
And active.
And
outdoors.
active
Yeah.
outdoors, doing the sustainability, not realizing what that I was doing, and that's why it led me into this program. Then I tried to apply for the Forest Service, and I've always been, and I couldn't because of the piece of paper, but I was like, I'd like to work in for Jewel Cave or the Badlands. I've been there and I love the geology, and I thought I would love to be working for the Forest Service and do interpretive work on the geology of the Badlands and be able to speak and know how to do that, not just memorize your lines of being, do a skit. You memorize it and go, you're just a brain on a stick, but nothing is sticking to that brain.
So you got to make it interesting.
You have to make it
audience.
interesting.
You could
and
go off on a tangent, like just do some creative thing, like do a poem
you
or
could do a
something,
play.
or,
You could use puppets, or have
or poetry.
poetry,
Or
to make it.
Skits, yeah.
And it's real interesting, and I'm excited because I'm doing it on organic foods and the environment, and it's like I wanted my audience to be like towards kids, so I'm thinking how could I make that provocative towards kids that they're going to be interested in.
Right. In public relations, we call those tactics.
Tactics? Okay.
When you get down to the nitty-gritty, it's tactic. You got
Okay.
goal, objectives, strategies, and then the tactics is where rubber hits the road, essentially, with things like skits and poetry readings and press releases and things, and video releases and stuff, but a lot of creative things like that which engage the audience members.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How interesting. Okay, Chris, Dr. McCart, what do you have to say about your definition
Of interpretation. So,
how did you get into that?
Well, yeah, I know. No, actually, I got into that when I was 22 years old, flying over Sioux Falls, and I saw some areas that I used to ride my horse. And I saw some areas that used to be, mixed agriculture, so, grass and pasture and row crop and other things. And as I was flying over, this is really the beginning of that push to industrial ag. Just hardcore. It'd been going on a long time. And I saw the Sioux River flowing really brown. And I literally had this moment when I was flying over, because I had a biology degree as an undergrad, and I said, I'm going to be an educator, because if people knew to care and I could help them develop that sense of care and the knowledge, and at that time I thought it was all about knowledge. If I just taught them the knowledge, then I will make a difference. Now, I didn't have a name for it at that time. Later on, as I worked with different organizations, I learned about this field called interpretation. Now, it's an interdisciplinary field, and in my world, it comes out of human dimensions of natural resource. However, its theoretical basis is in communication studies, so where they're going. The students are quoting Sam Hamm. He's pretty much a leader, if not a guru, in the field. And
what's his era? Is he current?
Yeah, he's current.
Okay.
Yeah, he's getting towards the end of his career, but he does a lot of work, and he really synthesizes a lot of research. Their textbook's called Interpretation, Making a Difference on Purpose. But if you want a definition of interpretation,
Yes.
I actually wrote it out so I would not mess this up. So, as defined by the National Association of Interpretation, it's a mission-based communication process that makes emotional and intellectual connections between the interests of the audience and the meanings inherent in the resource. So this really comes out of the framework. Simply put, I could get complex, but the roots of it go all the way back to John Muir and I'll interpret the rocks and all that kind of stuff.
John Muir was the
I wrote my
Sierra Club.
And he wrote My Summer in the Sierra, and I'm going to look over at the English professor there for that.
You've probably read it more recently.
And then the National Park Service really kind of professionalizing that idea. Another way, a very simple way, and you'll notice I tend to this because I've been working in the field a long time, is we take the complex and we interpret it to the general audience. So we take the ologist stuff and we make it relevant and meaningful to the general public. And that usually requires a great level of humility in you're not dumbing it down, but you're making it something that they care about and communicating it in a way that can make those connections.
Right. Very good. Yes, exactly. I want to go back just for a second, since we had mentioned it just a minute. I would like to talk about the interdisciplinary aspects. I want to talk about the interdisciplinary aspects of interpretive studies for just a bit. And I just wanted to get your take on that, as long as we talked about it being interdisciplinary. Comments on that? And what may be the relevance of that interdisciplinary nature of interpretive studies? What's the benefit of that? Is there a pro and con? I don't know. You want to take a stab? David, do you have something to say? Chris? Abby?
I'll just throw out a thought there, in that in order to interpret something, you have to know something. So there's content area knowledge depending on what you're interpreting. The students in this class, they spend about half the semester writing a research paper about their chosen environmental topic. And they often go, we want to get to the, what did you call it, the tactics? Yeah, we want to get to the applied, because that to them has real relevance, right? But we spend a lot of time on that.
Well, I was just thinking, talking about it being interdisciplinary, we don't have specific interdisciplinary studies of specifically saying that on campus, but we do have some classes that obviously maybe include some interdisciplinary activity that so many people would benefit from if they were just actually called interdisciplinary something or the other, and not categorized underneath something specific such as outdoor ed or mass communication or whatever. So I think when I think of interpretive study, I think totally interdisciplinary, and I think it's something that it raises levels of awareness, as you say, and engagement and empowerment. I think that's an issue. So anybody else might want to comment on that?
Just a quick example that actually fits the interpretive studies element with that and the interdisciplinary nature. One of our really strong speech and English majors, Clint Augustin, graduated from here a few years ago, and he ended up doing interpretation as a ranger. He did interpretive ranger work, and he was eminently qualified, I think, in his degree overall because of that. And so it was. He may even still be doing it. I just saw him post something recently on Facebook, but he wasn't sure what he was going to go into next. That's Clint, but the fact that he went into that interpretive line of work, and all of us, if we've gone to the national parks, we've been exposed to that interpretive type of naturalist and rangers and so forth.
And, related to what you're at, a lot of the research in this field comes out of communication studies. So there.
Comments from Abby or Lisa on that?
Well, maybe as far as specifics, for years, I camped with my family, tied flies with my father and my grandfather. I fished since I was, old enough to walk, but never got into the hunting much, but it was always embedded in our heads when we did camp and when we did go to the outdoors you respect. And now, I never knew that there was a word for it. And now we have a program that Chris introduced us to, is Leave No Trace. You pack out what you take in. And we got to actually test, this whole theory when we went backpacking in October. It was...
Where did you go?
We went up to the Bighorns.
Okay.
Yeah, Sand Creek. So it was an enjoyable experience.
And you did it for the class?
We did it for the class.
And how many people went?
There was 30 of us.
Yeah, 26, but we broke into small groups. So we had teaching assistants to these small groups.
Was it cold?
Yeah, it got a little chilly, but we were all prepared. We had great gear. We did a gear check before we left. Really enjoyable. I've never camped with that many people. And as far
did you camp or backpack?
We backpacked and we camped. And it was a 2-day event. We learned a lot about one another and ourselves. But as far as the aspect of, leave no trace, I always wondered, well, those, those people that didn't know that littering is a no-no.
The immature people.
The immature,
right.
not the idiot, the immature, excuse
people.
me.
Yes.
But, as far as...
It's a matter of interpretation, right?
Doesn't really help them change their comment.
But it was a good experience, and it really, all those years of having that, instilled, you will not litter in the outdoors, you will respect the outdoors. And I found that, and as far as, interdisciplinary action, you finally get to engage in something.
Right.
That actually means...
Just from your setting, I'm imagining this a possible scenario involving heavy interpretive activity, and that is 26 different people of various different backgrounds, completely different backgrounds, and with all different kinds of stories and social and political and economic orientations, and you're going to have a lot of interpretation and interpretive activity going on in that situation.
Yeah, and it was great because we had tons of different lessons, on the way up the mountain and on the way down, during our camp, everything. We had such a good time, and it was a really interpretive lesson
right?
for all of us.
Oh, yes.
And this might be a good place to interject. The field of interpretation, what I find really interesting is that the world of experiential ed and the world of classic interpretation, give the interpretive talk, are moving closer together. The big strategic plan for the National Park Service is to push something that several fields are talking about, this facilitated dialogue. So basically it's not and education, not passive engagement, but active engagement. So this field trip that they talk about is pretty powerful because I'm doing very little teaching myself, and these guys are working and they're engaged and they're having discussions and they're not being told what to think, but boy, do they have to think.
Because they're learning everybody's throwing out all different kind of perspectives, and so you're learning and thinking, wow, I never thought that before. Right? Or I never thought, specifically that example before, and that kind of thing.
Or not how to think, but they're not telling you specifically how to think. It's for you to think for yourself. Does that make sense?
Yep, to think for yourself. Yeah, very interesting. Lisa, did you want to add on?
Well, I was just thinking before I came into the term interpretation, being a substitute teacher, I was like, well, some of the things that Chris has taught us and Sam Ham is like, well, I was actually using it to teach, especially with kids in elementary, and I subbed because you're engaging them, you're getting them to think, making it enjoyable with skits and, props or, slides, the old-fashioned overheads before computers. And so I, didn't realize that that's what I was actually doing, was interpretation work. And teaching aerobics, I'd always have to choreograph out the songs, figure out how I was going to engage it. So the guys liked it so it wasn't too dancey. And so, sorry, getting off outdoor ed, but it was funny that when I look back at it that I was actually doing a lot of interpretation.
On a daily basis, because you never know just how people are going to take your words and actions because of their own specific customized makeup of their own psychology and their own, their own personal experiences in society too. So it's almost just everybody's walking around, with very, with unique framework and mind frame, and it just gets to be so interesting, conversation. Even just what we're doing right now, right?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking about the metaphor of the door, And what will you do to close the door? And what will you do to pry it open? And what are some strategies you can do not to shut them down right away? And I have my English friends to thank for some of their discussions of Carl Rogers and his form of argument. And we have borrowed from that heavily to help folks learn how to make an argument that won't be off-putting, because environmental topics are so controversial and so opinionated. So we've borrowed from that very heavily in this class for them to build their argument towards a solution.
And you say Carl Rogers is an expert in this?
Rogerian logic.
Yeah.
And again, current or what era?
Oh, he's more 70s.
Yes, he's
70s,
dead now, I
60s.
think,
Yeah, he's dead now, but
I just have to ask this too, is how do memories have effects on interpretation? Have you talked about that or have some ideas on that?
we talk about kind of aligned with the idea of pre-assessment, but so they've been doing a lot of brain research. So that's the big new area, what activates that. And these guys, let me put it this way. I walk around with this ruler with this picture of the brain stuck on it that has little Velcro pieces on it. And then so, I mean, it obviously works.
I have a brain on a stick.
Memorable. Yeah.
So
a brain on a stick.
memories are the Velcro spots. Yeah. If it has meaning for you and you bring some new information, a new way of thinking about an environmental issue or something like that, how it sticks and what sticks really... It starts with your audience and that. So that is one way we talk about that. I know there's a lot of other research with that, but when you talk about memory, and one of the really neat concepts that Sam talks about, I've never seen anybody else use this word, but he calls it zone of tolerance.
Zone of tolerance.
And he talks about that being, if you are a true interpreter, in the spirit of Tilden, who is the father of NPS, National Park Service interpretation,
I see.
you want to provoke. Now, my students always say, provoke, make them mad? Oh, isn't that? I thought you said we can't close their door.
Conflict.
Yeah. The point for that is to get them to think or do differently. And so in order to do that, if you're truly interpreting, you're not telling them what to think. And you have to have that zone of tolerance because they may interpret it much more differently than what you thought.
Oh, yes, all the time.
Yeah.
With students, that's what we deal with all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to talk about that a little
Well,
bit?
actually, I was going to use a couple things Chris said as a bridge, and in talking about provoking, that's a huge aspect of Edward Abbey's career. And
we just want to explain a little bit who Edward Abbey is in case people don't know.
Yeah, he was, among other things, a writer, certainly a gadfly, a big troublemaker, and he was also a national park ranger for a few years, and many years in some ways. And his most famous book is probably either Desert Solitaire or The Monkey Wrench Gang. And the second book is about essentially ecological sabotage. And the first book is partly nonfiction and partly fiction, which of course brings up an interesting issue about nonfiction and fiction and the whole idea, how do stories change? And Wordsworth, the great romantic poet, Wordsworth talks about poetry being and I'm not going to get the quotation exact here, but memory that is recollected in tranquility. That's what you produce from what you experienced, say at Tintern Abbey for Wordsworth, or somewhere else, and it's actually your recollection in tranquility, and you change it through that. And as a poet and other types of writing I do too, from nonfiction to fiction, I've often realize that's exactly true for me because I use a lot of natural imagery for states of mind and for other things as well. But then Abbey, kind of getting back to him with that idea behind us as part of it, this recollecting and tranquility, Abbey lied a lot.
Not the Abbey sitting here.
Not Abbey. No,
Edward Abbey.
Edward Abbey. Yeah. Edward Abbey lied a lot.
Told stories.
Told stories.
And stories are at the center of interpretation in so many ways.
Yes, absolutely.
But Abbey liked to tell the story, and he does it more than once in some of his essays, about supposedly he and buddies going around throwing empty beer bottles out their windows because they were on paved roads and because the Boy Scouts would come and pick them up. So they were doing a public service. Now, he actually I have it on good authority from a mutual friend. I never knew Abby, but this mutual friend was part of it. They really did that. Abby supposedly claimed also earlier in his life to have rolled a tire into either the Grand Canyon or one of its tributary canyons.
That's when he was immature.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. He was
Well, a strong case in many ways can be made for Abby not only always staying immature, but also being an idiot.
Yes.
But anyway, these stories are fascinating, and even the ideas, and of course she's trying to be humorous at the same time. And provocative, which is where I wanted to really connect to, is that the ideas of the recollection and tranquility and the provocative.
But yet humorous way in some cases.
Yeah, sometimes I read Abby and I just mad at it. It's more than angry.
Isn't that
over
something?
radio.
I'm going to get around to some specific examples and kind of some of this in the current landscape, the current political, environmental, social landscape. I want to get onto that, but there's at least one more specific thing that I wrote down, and that was the issue of framing in interpretation. And I think that's an important concept to consider, especially kind of building off of what we were just talking about. Again, I just want to kind of leave it open to defining, and maybe perhaps you experts giving some examples of that, or an example of that comes to mind. The issue of framing, or the process and concept of framing.
Well, I'm a little nervous because I'm guessing this is coming out of a communication framework.
It is.
And honestly,
I'm not sure.
I just want to see what you have to say.
Yeah, I know. And actually, at some point, I keep wanting to jump into my teacher role. I keep wanting to ask you questions.
I know.
But, we'll go back to, the importance of context is key to learning. And in what framework are they putting that in? Interpreters are obsessed with longevity of learning. I mean, the research out there in the Journal of Interpretation has a lot to do with, did they remember this 6 months out, 8 months out? And some of it you could argue is rather shallow. Who cares if they know facts? Does it actually lead to action? Huge controversy that in the associated field of our environmental education. Should we be about behavior change? But the key with that is, and framing for them is, what framework are they have? What lens are they looking at through the world? What do they even know? And then there's just the framing as far as how are you interpreting the idea, through what structure are you providing it. I always remember that, and my students remind me of this, is how much we can hold at a time, especially of new information, and how organized it is. Sometimes I get really excited, so as a professor I tend to go through steps A through Z and 4 or 5 tangents at the time, and I have lost the group. And in doing that, I've lost the ability to help them think in a new way. So framing what we're doing, that provokes in me the idea of framing the idea, the organization, what you do, and the research that has. When Ham structures that he said that is the second most important things towards making behavior change, is the organization of what you do. But what do you think it is?
Framing?
Yeah. Or how do you interpret it in your background, in your
Well, I think there's you can have organized framing, but I also think you can have spontaneous, habitual framing, and some of it is purposeful, and some of it is just a matter of habit. I think you get into habits of how you present information, right? If you're a habitual tangent maker, you're going to do that constantly. If you are a manipulator, you have that habit. Well, I'm going to let you talk about that. So Lisa said she had an idea about being a manipulator or something.
Well, I'm thinking interpreting. That you can manipulate your audience too, to make them think.
Absolutely.
If you're biased, you could manipulate them to think your way on a subject that you're very strongly for.
You totally have the intention of affecting people and having an influence on them. And of course, I mean, that's a huge goal of something like public relations. I mean, you're working to persuade people constantly, and the hope is that you're doing it based upon triangulated research with a goal of applying objectivity because of your triangulated research, but using keywords, phrases, and rhetoric that will still guide people in a certain direction in an ethical and legal way.
Right.
That's what we do at the university level anyway. Corporate situations, often political situations, go awry. It has to do with power tripping and power issues oftentimes. egos, all kinds of psychological issues, mob mentalities, and that type of thing. So that all plays into that situation. But yeah, interesting. Human process for sure.
Yesterday we were talking about ways to make it relevant and what is relevance and how do you make it relevant to your audience. And we talked about the process of labeling. Well, this is a group of people who care about the environment. And so we defined the term, we gave them some examples, and I said, now you know how you are being manipulated. When I say the phrase, and you guys are students who care about your education and get your study time in, I am manipulating you. And you should be aware of those things. So sometimes I try, although I really respect folks like you in pure communication studies, there are many ways that if you're not aware, the process of behavior change, it's good to know, they're using emotion on me.
Right?
I am so hooked.
Sometimes it's dangerous to be someone to know about it because you're constantly analyzing every single situation that you encounter. You know, it's hard to sometimes just have a basic conversation with even your mother or father, right? Because you're analyzing and hanging and literally hanging upon every word.
Especially my mother.
Or mother-in-law, perhaps.
That's in the past.
Yeah, right. Yep. But other comments on framing? Anyone? Abby or David? Do you want to piggyback on that? Just kind of brainstorm on it.
All I would say is, again, I always come back to art, of course, and we all have our filters that are certainly in place. And you gals commented about that some too a little while ago, Abby and Lisa, and right? The whole idea of framing. I love to take pictures, and I've gotten much more interested in visual art over the years. I don't know the techniques and all the technical terms, but seem to have an innate understanding of composition and of framing within those contexts. And I never can take a picture anymore without trying in some way to frame it. And I think that's a lot of it. We want people to see what we see, hopefully the beauty that we see, but also hopefully the skill and the artistic skill, if you will, that's behind it. To me, that's part of framing too.
Right. I think some of the other common words that go along with framing that we know are like cropping. I do a lot of cropping, and photography is very hands-on work and cropping parts of pictures out or in. Photography, also editing, revising, that's all framing. Some of it's just mechanical activity, punctuation, grammar, and that kind of thing, but a lot of it's content oriented and that type of thing, In the mass communication field, very selective about how you leave in. A lot of the reasoning given for editing sometimes is due to space or time. But because of the space and time, you can take out parts or leave in parts, or the editor has control of all of that, and it's all framing. So you have 15 column inches and for space, and you have a story that's 20 column inches, and you got to fit into the 15 column inches. You're going to edit to that, and you can take out whatever you want and leave whatever you want in, and that's pretty powerful. I mean, that's really powerful stuff. And I think when I talk with students, especially early on in their study of communication and mass communication, they don't realize how powerful that is right at their fingertips, and how many people they're going to affect by what they leave out and what they put in.
On the other hand, I have to say in recent months, I have become fond of editors. I have a friend who's a Lutheran pastor, and she says it's very similar to that. She's like, I'm glad I have a bishop because I need someone to rein me in. And I imagine with the news, it's very similar. I'm glad I have an editor because that keeps me honest and keeps me from going off. And I tell you, I have been seeking out news sources that are edited.
While we're on that topic, let's segue into kind of the current landscape and using whatever examples that you wish. I know that some of you sent some examples about what you'd like to talk about in advance, so you could weave some of that into the conversation. Or I'd really like to address some of the issues that are happening in our current landscape. Just before the show, Chris had asked me what was the genesis for doing the special topic show, and I just exclaimed NWO, New World Order. And my anxieties that have risen quite a bit in the last few months due to that potential New World Order, or what I'm interpreting as that potential New World Order. So I decided to do the Special Topics Radio to gather people together to talk about it, because we hear about it being talked at office doorways and in the hallways and in classrooms and on the street corners and in grocery stores and everywhere else. I'd like to talk about it here and get that conversation going here, and see if we can make changes or raise consciousnesses or bring about awareness, that kind of thing. So if we can kind of talk about some examples, specific examples that you're working with in the current landscape, or things that you feel that we can tie to the topic matter. I'm just going to leave it wide open.
Well, I'll throw one idea out. There's so many things. But just one that hits me as very, perhaps, a small piece of this is when I started off working in this field many years ago, we used to talk about the field of environmental education. And I worked with an organization that did environmental education. I recently was working with them, and they now do conservation education. And the words are changing because the word environmental puts out some connotations. I will give an example of, we decided in order to operate in a society, we need kids who understand the issues and that are complex and are equipped to do rational, reasoned thinking about them and making their own choices. So a friend and I and several others, she really was the lead on that, did a series of meetings to get people's input, to get that, to really get public input in order to say, should we have standards like we have math standards and reading standards? Should we have environmental education standards in the state of South Dakota? So we had a series of those meetings, and we thought that was great because we thought that would be like having an editor. It wouldn't get way out there, but that fear was there. When we had the meeting here in town, to make a long story shorter, it was full of some folks from an organization that thought we were going to indoctrinate and brainwash children. And I was thinking, no, I'm an academic. We don't do that. But anyway, so that is my example of how that took me at such surprise, because my frame and my thing is such that, no, here's some ways to think about it. And I think for years we've been teaching, I'm giving you the information as best as I can. Now you make your decision. And so to have that be interpreted by somebody else as brainwashing has, to this day, really, really shocked me.
Interpretations can lead to a lot of controversy, and a lot of disagreement, and a lot of hurtful feelings, and a lot of misunderstanding, essentially, as well as empowerment and awareness, as I said earlier. Other ideas, examples, specific examples that you want to talk about? Anybody?
Well, I'll throw out one project we do in the class just because I recently graded it. The real challenge, and you ask us to look at that, so I will tie in one of my research hobbies is look at how people reason about complex environmental issues, right? And there's one thinker, so most everybody knows about Kohlberg, and he was a guy of the 50s and 60s. He was really worried about what happened with the Holocaust and, during World War II and all and that. So he was like, how could people let that happen? And so he led this huge series of studies to look at how people reason and how they do their decision making. So my study applied some of his later work and that of his colleagues to this idea of how do people reason about environmental ethics and outdoor ethics. But related to your topic, I will take it one step further. Even since, I did most of my research and collected most of my data in 2012, there's been even further research, and the field is skewing more. And there's a lot of controversy right now, simply put, broad generalization alert, that people rarely reason by reason. that they reason by emotion. Well, they use emotion, they use gut, they use confirmation bias, and then they use the reasoning to back up what they already have. Anyway, and so as that relates to that, I have this strong effort to work on those skills of reasoning. And that
And
I think
logic.
that's, and logic, and
Be rational and rationalize.
to rational and to set aside your biases for a moment. So, and that's where I try to get my students to take ethics and logic and all those courses all the time.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, that's too hard. And I'm thinking, exactly.
Those are your philosophy
makes you
things. Yeah.
You know, yeah.
So maybe.
So the trained mind.
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
Use
So
one of those.
Abby and Lisa, can you give some examples, like as a student addressing that kind of activity that Dr. McCart just mentioned?
I can mention that one of her assignments was the Rogerian, is that I'm saying that right?
Took it
Paper, and I was like, okay, I was on one side for organic foods to help your health and the environment, and in this paper we had to write the opposite. Well, then I actually was starting to convince myself it was better the other way.
See?
And I was like, now wait a minute.
That's what.
And I was going, okay, no, then I started researching more on my side, which, I'm biased because this is the way I feel, because I do eat organic and I pick up, the trash, and I don't, I recycle, and then when people don't, I get a little, upset.
It's like every little piece of paper
Yeah.
you see, it's
Yeah.
got to go in the recycling. You
And
get into those
so
habits.
then I struggle because I've never written a paper like that. And now when I watch TV, I'm doing both sides of the story. So
Yes.
it's made me more broad-minded than being so tunnel focused
Right.
on how do I interpret this is because it touches me and being outdoors and stuff. But what about the other person on the other end that's making the living with machines?
Right.
And I'm thinking, no, we don't need all that pollution. And so, it's made me really think about each topic. And I thought that was going to be an easier one. But
And you have to consider the amount of people that don't think that way.
they don't think
don't
both
think that
sides
way.
of your brain.
No.
Look at both issues on both sides of the debate.
Do you feel that that's happening? I know, Dr. McCart, you mentioned, that people are working more off of emotion rather than logic. Do you see examples of that around you these days?
Yeah, I see people. They more react emotionally and then logically or intellectually to step back before they say something.
Well, and it depends upon the topic,
Yeah,
too,
on the
and how
topic.
passionate they are about it.
Yeah,
Do you find that more with immature people? Or
yes.
do you find it less on a university campus? Do you find it, I'm just trying to get at
I guess what's popping in my mind is, and I know the issue was here about the canyon and the debate
Yes.
over the canyon. We have
over Spearfish Canyon, so
Yes.
just briefly.
Yeah, and I was reading a paper that
So Spearfish
was
Canyon was going to be designated as
a state
as
park.
a state park. Okay.
And then my personal view, no. But then I was reading a student's paper in the class that had the opposite view. And when I read it, I was like, yeah, I can see that point of view.
Oh.
So that helped me, because
Yes.
the analogy of it was your park in your backyard, would you want everybody going into it?
Right.
And I started thinking, I'm kind of like that with the bighorns. Because I'm up at Cloud Peak. I grew up there for 40-some years hiking those, and the roads have closed, which I'm glad on some, and everybody's complaining. But they're opening roads, and it's like up to Coffeen Park, which you used to almost have to walk the road. Cars are getting there. And I'm like, I don't want all those cars there. Well, I have to look at the other side, too.
Right.
And that's what I did with the canyon issue. My side and the opposite side. So I had to start looking at that. When I read that paper, I was like, yeah, I see, that's a very good analogy.
It's a process of moving toward open-mindedness.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and I think as students, too, we learn how to become
Exactly.
more open-minded.
Yeah, I think
We
that's the big thing. People sometimes don't understand the process of engaging in gen eds, for example, and certain types of topic matter or subject matter that doesn't seem to have an obvious practical application. But this is what happens in those classrooms, is that open-mindedness begins to happen, and thinking begins to happen, and tolerance begins to happen. And then those rise to the level of becoming habits, and that's where we save each other from destruction. Right? I don't know. But I just have to say, I just went on a road trip around the country, taking the back way, byways, and I was shocked at how many people responded on emotion alone.
Oh, yeah.
In all the little cafes and all the small
Cafes are
libraries.
great.
And,
I love cafes for that. I love to just sit
right?
and listen.
I
do.
and especially with the new political landscape, I had to be very cautious about presenting my Black Hills State University T-shirt. I didn't want to reveal that I was a member of the academic establishment because I don't know that that would have gone over real well in some of those places. And I wanted to remain a little bit incognito so that people would talk as they normally do in those places without. I mean, they recognized me as an outsider right off the bat, and some even commented on that, like, "Where are you from?" You know, and then when I said where I was from, of course, they had stereotypes. That was the next thing out of the mouth that happened about where I was from. You know, it wasn't like, "Well, welcome to Jonestown" or something. Like, "Oh, you do that up there, right?" And I was like, "Well, yeah."
Of course, who wants to be welcome to Jonestown?
Yeah. Well,
Too much Kool-Aid.
I was actually very near there in Texas. I was driving through. But yeah, more comments on this.
Well, Lisa kind of took my whole range of.
I'm sure you have your own stories from your background of experience, though,
Well, as far as
in your own process.
well, in an environmental interpretation class, my paper was whether or not we should make recycling a law, or consider it to still be a choice. And it's the first time ever doing a research paper that I did have to get two sides. And I can totally see where the opposing side won't recycle, and it makes it a little more interesting for the writer, just, well, gosh, how do you find the common ground,
It can even raise your level of passion a little bit about what
and
you're
it
doing.
does, and it does. Well, here in Spearfish, I've done a lot of research as to where and how we recycle, and the only availability that we have is here on campus. So I've brought all my home waste management, have washed it and cleaned it, know what we can recycle, know what we can't recycle, and I would like to make it more of a situation as far as Spearfish Town goes, to make it more, well, I guess, more optional as far as the blue box goes for our town. I even went as far as Belfouche. They no longer have the recycling facility available. We'd have to take all of our waste to Rapid City. So, and it's sad because you drive by all these dumpsters every day and you see them piled up. Our landfills can only have so much.
Right.
And you're like, oh, we can recycle that. We can, you almost want to, I know this sounds weird, but go dumpster diving to try and help our environment,
Sure.
As far as what we can do, as far as us little people to try and to help.
Yeah, before I moved here, I lived in 2 states where I had residences, Wisconsin and Colorado, and both of them have laws about recycling. I was in Boulder, and I was in all of Wisconsin has laws about recycling, and they're very progressive in that way. And every little piece of paper and everything's divided up, and you have space in your home for these. People say they don't want it because it's too much space, but you make space for it, big containers, and you throw every single piece in there. And I was so used to that. And when I came here, it was very, very different. I could barely get out of the habit of doing that. And I was at a little bit of a loss about it, I must say.
Well, the biggest common denominator, maybe even like with the New World Order and everything, is that money is the measure of all things now. And that's what we heard here years ago in terms of recycling in Spearfish. I've been here since 2000 now, so it gives you some framework for that time without me getting into names and politicians and so forth.
And that's in terms of Spearfish, that's a long period of time that I think there's a lot of changes that have taken place, but there's still a lot more to do. Yeah.
And here at the school would be another example where change was very slow. The town had recycling before the school did. And then, of course, we lost that too, but still. So there's a lot of things to be said, I think, in terms of the whole equation is money, and it really has long been, and that's what the New World Order is, frankly, really about too, is money.
Would you say the money thing would be more about not having enough, or not having enough to distribute, or distributing it in the wrong places, or taking it away from places like the EPA?
Yes,
Be
yes,
very
yes,
specific.
yes. It's all of those. It's
there
money in every form.
Is there a huge disparity among sectors of society and classes of society and all of those things? Yes,
Where's
yes,
the
yes.
human element is what I always come back to as a humanist, because of, that's what I teach, is humanities and English and literature, and what are we doing to each other and to our fellow creatures, my Shih Tzus and everybody else, everything else. My rabbit that comes in the yard.
Yeah. Yes, the whole karma about all of those things. I always tell everybody about my pet crow. Like, if they have any leftovers, whatever they want to send home with me, I'll take it from my pet crow, and everybody laughs. But seriously, I have a relationship with this crow, and he comes every morning by my window at a certain time and crows, and then I put out some corn, and he's good to go for the rest of the day,
Animals are part of what humanizes,
Yeah.
or dehumanizes, I think, too, if we're cruel.
And I do like all kinds of animals and have relationships with animals in all various places that I go, but the crow has been one of the most recent and the most special. But I have to tell you that a lot of people don't understand those relationships. When I say that, they think I'm crazy, of course. They're like, oh my God, she's got a crow, and I feel very strongly about that relationship. I value that relationship.
I have a pet rabbit I feed, and she runs around my house.
Oh, awesome.
I get the scraps from the grocery store.
So how do you feel about the current landscape of society right now, specifically locally, but regionally or nationally, even internationally now, politically, socially? How do you feel about new administrations and how they're handling these situations? How do you feel about cutbacks at the Environmental Protection Agency and messing around with that kind of thing? How does that fit into this whole scheme of things?
Having been alive before the EPA and remembering some of the things, and even when the EPA was younger, we don't want to go back there, or if we do, we're nuts and we really have a death wish. As a species.
As a species, yes.
I have a broad generalization to make that was spurred by reading a book called Our Kids. And it's and it's the same guy who wrote Bowling Alone, so he looks at big trends.
Putnam.
Thank you. And his big, so to put this in how I picture this, his statement was, before when they said our kids, they meant all the kids in our town. And now there's a tribalism, and our kids are our good kids from our group. I am a benefit, because I'm a first generation student, of living in a community where they looked around and said, she's kind of smart, and we're going to help her and get her a scholarship so she can go to college. And here I am. I don't know that would always necessarily happen these days. And so here's that tribalism, tying it, because as you know, everything, once you worked on a dissertation, you filter everything through that for a while. But when we looked at folks, an interesting side point, I want to touch on that because it just really hit for me. So there's a certain way that people look at the world. The immature people, it's all about them and their pluses and minuses. And some would say, broad generalization alert, that has been our societal norm since the 80s. It's all about me and what I can get. David Brooks would point on that, New York Times writer, more or less.
Then, a conservative, actually.
Yeah. And then
I agree with him on that too, having lived through those times.
And then you look ahead, another way folks test out about how they deal with these issues of morality and fairness, not only yourself or others, are the groups who care about maintaining norms. They decide good or bad based on what the rules are and what we do. And then there are those who are principled thinkers. So those are those, now, what they think is their greatest good really varies, but that's going to determine how they decide things. So you've got an interesting thing I got from my dissertation study was I did a series of pilot studies in New Hampshire, in a place that's very populated. They have to share a lot of their recreation things. And what they found was, for most people there, they would follow certain principles to protect the environment. They thought that was morally good because that was the norm in their northeastern corridor world.
Mm-hmm.
Just the opposite. I got the opposite when I did that study here with our students, because those were seen as outside. We don't do that here. We come, my guess with that when I did the qualitative research was, well, here we're about cutting down trees because we are a resource extraction group, and perhaps not having seen the consequences of that because we have been so thinly populated.
Mm-hmm. So the issue of a small population has something to do with it as well.
Yeah, but just the norms, what you hold for norms. So to tie those many thoughts together, I just really think that when you look at where are we now and what are things going, I just feel like sometimes things are shifting towards what's good for me and my group, and we're missing that piece. But what's good for all of us? What's good for the greater whole? I don't see that language invoked as much as I used to. But remember my upbringing, small town, Lutheran, South Dakota.
Oh, yeah, we got you on that one.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's my framework for that. But
So do you see that shift being sudden now or gradual over time?
Well, one has to always be really careful when you're making broad generalizations, but there's so much fun, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I would say I notice it more because I've traveled. So I spent 2 years in New Hampshire, and that gave me great perspective of back home. I also say I notice because I am the person from my immediate family who went on to not only get a college degree, but then to get a master's degree, and then to get a PhD degree. So, you code switch when you go back home so you don't get too big for your britches, Miss Big Words.
Everybody's like falling asleep at the table. You're talking on and on, and they're like,
learn that one
what
soon.
are they talking about?
For God's sake, shut up. But anyway, I don't think I have an objective view on that. I think. But it seems to me that that's, people feel like they're in more survival mode.
Survival mode, yeah.
And they're reacting to that more.
Why is that?
So there's my
Well, I was actually going to expand a little bit also on what she said and generalize in the process, but I think it really starts primarily with, with my generation, the baby boomers. We were spoiled too. And I think that you can even see the progressive, it should probably be called regressive, changes, but to the increasing solipsistic and narcissistic type of society that we have so epitomized in so many places around us these days.
And seems to be honored and glorified in some sectors, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to be being honored more and more and rewarded anymore.
And rewarded and overlooked.
And excused.
That could be a problem.
And excused.
Well, and I keep hearing recently, as far as not bringing up any other names, but we need this, Abby. We need to have, this harsh, narcissistic world. We have to have this right now to get where we need to go, because it's been taken away all these years by certain democratic situations.
And yet, and it's going backwards, though.
It is.
It's a backwards movement. It's not a forward movement.
Yeah.
Again, regressive,
Yeah. Right.
Very regressive.
What do you respond? How do you respond?
I try not to respond with too much, just because of, with our environmental background. I have Republican parents, so I kind of see it both ways. But when it comes down to it, I can just say we don't need to go back.
Right.
Just like, Dave was saying.
Yeah.
We can't. It'll be an industrial wasteland within the next 10, 20 years.
Is 7 generations ahead. Imagine that being part of our political philosophy. Someone coming in and say, well, now we have to plan for 7 generations ahead. And immature people, respond to that. I always want to just say idiots, right?
Yeah.
Immature people responding. I mean, you'd get all kind of response. But imagine if that was the scenario instead. What do you think?
You know, I'll throw out an idea, though. I'm not quite so hopeless as I was because, you know, there's different avenues folks have went by to make a difference, right? And not all of them are the legislative way. In fact, I think that's the worst way. It's helpful to legislate because the immature people operate by that. So you know what they call an angler. A poacher is someone who takes more fish when the warden isn't around. That's an example of an immature person, right?
Yeah.
You know, someone who takes their limit of fish, but they'll stop when they reach their limit. Will go, well, this is what my group does. Or if you come from my family, Davy Crockett, we are an ethical family. We follow ethical practices. So you do it because that's what we do.
Because that's the right thing to do.
That's the right thing to do.
Or you're mostly catch and release.
Yeah.
Like me. Not
I'm
exclusively,
mostly.
mostly.
You take the barbs off the hooks.
You better kill something every once in a while. Seriously, you better, because you will lose your perspective of what it's really about and value for.
Yeah, and trout does taste really good.
Yeah,
You gotta take some home
It's awesome.
sometimes.
It's awesome.
but there's there's value, and legalism and passing laws has been the way we've done things. And it's been a way to make some change and have us work with that. I actually have some hope. I think, maybe, people, there's still the role for education, and there's still the role, and we can do the right thing because it's the right thing. I'm an idealist. And so,
Thank goodness there's some of you around.
I know.
And she's an optimist too.
And
she's creating a lot of optimist
There you
people
We need more
in her program.
Yeah.
No,
We need more idealists and fewer ideologues.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So, otherwise, why would I work in education and make all this money?
That's yeah, right on.
I'm never going to be out of debt.
Ka-ching.
It's a way of life.
Lisa, did you have anything
No,
to
I think
add?
they've already covered it. I'm fine. I'm listening.
Well, we can
Chris and I have Irish blood, so that tells you a lot.
Well, there you go.
well, Riley, yeah.
Sorry, yes, of course.
You must have immigrants as ancestors.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put in some controversy here in the conversation.
Yeah. I'm always so frightened to go to controversy because
Shouldn't we all be shipped out except for those
Yeah.
living on Pine Ridge and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of it.
Seriously, yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Deported.
Yeah.
Did you have something that you're going to say?
No, I usually don't shy away from controversy, but I'm being
Yeah.
careful today.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. No. I think we're all doing really well.
Yep. I know.
And, we're academics, but, I am on the tenure track, just saying.
That's the advantage. I've used up my promotions and everything. I can't go any higher. No
that's-
incentive.
That's right.
Just retirement.
Retirement names. I wanted to see.
That's
if
why we
could-
need tenure.
Since we're in the topic of some problems or controversies, how can we use interpretive or a knowledge of interpretation and how that works in our interpretive studies, and how can we apply it towards problem solving?
Is one way. So story being, we've sat around the campfire telling stories for years and years. It's a powerful tool that we are wired for, right? I think there's a place for the arts. I'm a big fan of the humanities, even though I don't even know how to pronounce. I just found out I was pronouncing something wrong. That's the thing about being self-educated sometimes.
Most of us pronounce many things wrong.
Yeah.
In the field, too.
Yeah, but that said, so, I think there's roles for people to do their small part. There's the arts that tell the stories that help us to see things we might not have seen. There's those of us who help out with the community garden. So in talking about, that, and that's our place. And I guess my, where do we go from here is, I really think, so I will pick on Jim Hess. He's my boss.
And Jim is?
He is the chair of the School of Behavioral Sciences, and he's a psychology professor.
Here at BHSU.
And one thing that he did, which was pretty idealistic, we just had a meeting about this, he gave some money to have this Make a Difference scholarship, that kids could get some money for school, but in order to get it, you also had to do something for the community. And so, I think about that a lot, and I really think that's one of the roles of a university, is to not only say, this is what you get out of your degree, but what are you going to give back? And I would love to see us continue to have that. I think we have that, but to strengthen that idea and that culture and that norm. But each in their own way,
Right.
Some of us should not speak too much because, we go on tangents and tell stories and make jokes, and you think you're funny, but you're not. But there you go. But, and some should be the artists. Some should be out collecting data. That's the solution, is the idea that, are you contributing? And if you're not, why not? And even if, by my background, I sort of think the highest form of service is the Lutheran food ladies. Who are these people?
Right.
They make sandwiches when people die, and they bring them out to you.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Volunteers.
But they're volunteering.
I
They're
always say
doing their
bus
thing.
drivers,
They,
especially school bus drivers.
yeah, they're gonna be first in line. I'm just saying when
Yeah.
they die. But there you go.
Right
So
on.
that's very idealistic, and I don't care. But I think the university education has a big piece on that. I hope we don't throw out the humanities. I hope we continue to challenge folks and help them realize the value of critical thinking and problem solving and those kind of things. I would like to see us keep that as our mission and keep advocating for that when it's not really quite valued outside very
Right
much.
at the core
Yeah.
of what we do.
I guess what comes to my mind is what somebody's weak in, somebody else is stronger, and that's what we need each other for. That's basically what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So everybody kind of has their niche and their role.
Yep.
And it fits together like a puzzle, right?
You would
Most of
hope
the
so.
time.
Yeah, you hope so.
Sometimes the pieces don't fit very well.
No.
Or
And there has to be some
So
folks to
conflict.
go, the emperor has no clothes.
right.
Oh, love of God.
Right.
Chris brought that up during class one time, and Lisa and I are the older students in the group.
Experienced.
Yeah,
Yes.
experience.
Classic.
Right.
Live life.
And
I'm
Chris
probably
brought up,
oldest.
oh, the emperor has no clothes, and everybody looks around, and Chris and I, or Lisa and I are like, oh, yeah, you
Or
know,
the
and
old-
everybody-
Story, yes.
all the
the
other
old-
students were.
They didn't
Yeah.
even know what it was.
No.
No.
Oh, that's
Or the
sad.
old A-frame backpacks. They all looked at me like, what is that? Remember?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
gosh, don't get me started talking about my old backpack.
Oh, I still have it.
Oh, and she brought up Fogarty.
Yeah, and everybody,
Dan
nobody
Fogelberg.
yeah, and I'm like
Nobody
going,
knew who he was.
Had all his albums.
Yes,
All
yeah.
his albums. Awesome. When I was living
Now
in
that
Boulder,
was-
he was
Grew
a
up
resident. Fogelberg used to play right down at the bar, right down the street from where I lived.
Oh, wow.
I saw him in concert
Back in
once.
the days, 70s.
Yeah, like
If
Fulbright.
only.
Yeah, see?
Yeah.
Boy, this is deep talk here.
Yeah, and I did. And when
I
I
threw us off, sorry.
And I
That's all
did
right.
get a note from Ed Abbey one time when I
Ooh,
when
yeah.
I was the editor of the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Sierra Club newsletter, and
Yeah.
I put up something a little bit controversial, and he sent me a note saying, "Right on."
Yeah.
And apparently, that was really hit a chord with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was some people that didn't like it. They interpreted it negatively.
Negatively.
Yeah, and that's really tough. People are so careful. I happen to be one of them. When we're all being so careful, we're actually censoring ourselves. Right?
We are
Yeah.
censoring ourselves, and we're getting maybe possibly too politically correct in some ways.
Yeah.
And I think we need to sometimes discuss things more openly and not have such hurt feelings about every little word that's said. Like you say, that changes with society's norms and what's accepted and what's not, and what's tolerated at certain periods of history, essentially.
Yeah, I really got to keep telling kids to suck it up, can't I? It's just not go over well.
Cowboy up.
Yeah,
Cowgirl up.
yeah.
Is there anything else that we want to just say as final comments now? And I'd really like to hear a little bit from each of you, maybe just some things that we didn't talk about that you have on your list or had in mind to talk about. Just comments on that you want to recap on some of the things we talked about, or something new that's come to mind. And okay, so Abby's going to go.
Well, David mentioned earlier how, we need to have more optimism, and we need to, as far as the world order situation goes, we need to have more idealists and optimism and care about one another, and not, push push each other away, use money as the root of all evil. But I think it's just really important that we continue to grow instead of regress. And also, too, outdoor education. It's a wonderful program.
I didn't pay her to say
No,
that.
she didn't. But it's really helped me to find myself in these previous years. So that's what I got.
Okay, well, thank you, Abby, and thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess I'm thinking about being more open-minded, seeing both sides of the issue, especially when it comes to environmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
And in the academic area of, with classes, I have actually taken classes that I didn't think, because I didn't know much about, or I thought they were going to be too hard, which actually opened my eyes, like philosophy. I took a class all by myself in the evening. Well, actually, I took it with a friend way back, and I was like, why am I taking this class? And it was from 7 to 9, and I enjoyed it. But I took it because I wanted to see what is philosophy. And it did. It opened my mind. Or I'm thinking, this class I'm not going to like because it's on administration. And I'm like, I don't want to learn about policies and procedures. I don't want to interview the YMCA. And I've actually liked it and doing well. And I'm like, I actually like this stuff. And it's interesting. And I was like, okay, it's opened my eyes to look at it at a different way. Why do I need this? Well, you may be doing this. Because I'm thinking in my little brain, I want to work for the Forest Service, but I want to be outside. I'm not going to be in an office. Well, you might be. You will be. And especially with the younger generation, me being 50, I'm like going, no, you got to look at retirement. You've got to look at this. I'm not going to apply for these jobs in seasonal because I don't want to just be doing seasonal. I'll be 60. I was like, you got to learn.
December for me.
Okay, sorry.
Me too, only
I'm not trying to age us all here, but it's just I've going back to school's made me open my eyes to the reality of the way I used to be, and then the middle, and now, and going forward to. And how am I supposed to communicate that to the younger generation too?
Right. And how will they interpret that?
And how will they interpret it? And how am I supposed to reveal it without sounding condescending or I'm a mother?
Right.
And I usually just keep my mouth shut and watch.
Well,
I'm being honest.
To
That's,
just
you learn a lot.
You step back, and not that I'm a know-it-all or anything, but I'm just like going, yeah, I did that too.
Yep. And then age is crept up on yellow. But with that wisdom.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Speaking of wisdom, Dr. McCart.
Yes, well, let me give you the voice of wisdom here.
Indeed.
Yes, indeed. Well, the theme was interpretation, and it was a fun conversation. And I certainly would like to visit with you more about some of your communication background.
Sure.
Because I love any chance I get a chance to talk to other folks about their area. It's always fascinating. So of late, and I'll finish by saying this, since we've been talking a lot about education and how we learn and how are we going to not slide backwards, how we're going to continue to be a society that cares about learning and stuff. And so we have this idea in outdoor ed called expedition behavior. And it sounds
expedition behavior. And
yes.
it's called just like that. You have to say it just like that.
That's right. That's right. By golly, it's got to sound cool.
Yep.
But and the whole thing of it is that's your outdoor adventure teamwork. And if you don't work together, you're not going to have supper ready. And if you don't work together, you're going to, somebody's going to get mad. And if you don't work together, so that is the huge metaphor in the field of outdoor education is how are we going to have expedition behavior? Well, one of those ideas that I've been thinking about a lot lately is the idea of humility. And so that's my final thought that's ringing around in my head is this idea of, you may be the biggest, bestest, strongest, best outdoors person in the world.
And the richest one, too.
Yeah. Oh, with the best gear. Because
the most money.
Yeah, the outfit.
Yeah. But that said, but also but part of that thing is in order for expedition to work, you have to be part of the team. So you have to contribute to the team. And so I've really been thinking about interpretation, and I've been thinking about what we need to do if we want to help educate the public. And it's like being humble enough to continue to keep learning, being willing to work with excellence to do well in your studies and to do well in school so you know what the heck you're talking about. And then learning the tools of the trade. Learning those things well so that you can do it with art.
Right.
So
right.
I don't know if that meant anything, but that's what I was thinking about.
Very profound. Dr. Cremean, what do you have to say?
Well, the first thing I actually have to comment on, I guess, would be the idea that Chris was talking about there to some degree, but expedition behavior. When I taught backpacking, which I did for a number of times, Chris knows this, but nobody else does, but I taught, I think, 17 classes worth roughly 170 students. And that's why I was gawking at the 30, because it's like, wow, I think the biggest group I ever took out was 23.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So my permit doesn't get pulled. We were in 4 subgroups not camping together. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Just want to clarify that.
My favorite moment of expedition behavior was the gal who brought her butane curling iron along.
Oh, my gosh.
I don't remember her
seriously?
last name, but her first name was Misty. I remember that. Nice
Yeah,
name.
there's a riot.
Oh yeah,
And this was not in South Dakota.
Dakota.
It was in
Oh.
Ohio. Yeah.
Curling iron.
But I think it goes back to seeing and seeing differently, and that's really what art is
remember
about.
the
Art is,
bangs.
if you go across art, even the postmodern stuff, I don't care much for in terms of writing and so forth. It's still about seeing the world differently than it has been seen before, or how we see Annie Dillard, a great naturalist writer, has this passage that's wonderful. And so Tinker Creek is what I'm trying to say.
Tinker
there.
Creek.
And it's not the Tinker Creek in Wyoming by the Tetons. Oh no, that's Pilgrim Creek. Never mind. See, this is really seriously.
You know when it's time.
Yeah.
But it is about seeing, and one of my favorite education remarks ever made is actually by T.S. Eliot. And I used to teach this article for years as the first week of class, and I'm sure I still have a copy somewhere I could find it. But Eliot said that everybody should take a class that they have absolutely no interest in. And I don't think I ever did that. I usually dropped those classes. But I thought that's a great idea, because I was first exposed to that idea when I was a teacher, not a student. So, and I think that's what it's about, is seeing that people see the world differently, and in many cases that's not wrong or bad at all. Although certainly in some cases it is.
Going out of your stretch zone right there.
That's
Chris.
right there.
Yeah, I always think of this one class that completely changed my life. It was a gen ed. I was an undergrad at CU Boulder, and it was probably about 1978. And one summer I took an astronomy class. I never had an interest in space or outer space travel or any exploration or anything of the sort at all. I was a fine arts major. That class blew me away. And it's changed my life, and it's still, after so many years. And now I teach science communication, and so it's come around. But that's a class that I can say that has really changed me. It was like a 100 level astronomy class, but it just blew my mind. And and it's just lay up and watch the stars, and go, what's out there? What is out there? I want to really, really thank you for coming today. What an interesting conversation and topic matter. Good luck to everybody. Good luck to the students and faculty, and as you go forward into the rest of the semester. Thanks for coming. That's our special topic show for today, everyone. Hope it got you thinking. For more topics coming soon.